Hello, I'm going to share with you the results of a research study on the Ptolemaic aspects. The Ptolemaic aspects, of course, are the conjunction, opposition, square, trine, and sextile. And this research determines whether the Ptolemaic aspects work in a very particular situation. And what we did in this research is we took the 940 extraversion introversion scores. So in the Sirius astrology software, included with it are the scores for 940 people on introversion to extroversion. So this is a score of how introverted to extroverted each person is, and it's a score on a psychological test that is often used by professional psychologists. So it's a very good test. And the original study done with these scores was to test some ideas in vibrational astrology to see if Sun Jupiter and Mars Jupiter in 11 vibe would be extroverted, and if in 7 vibe it would be introverted. And also through some exploratory research we noticed that Jupiter, when it's way above the horizon, is inclined to be extroverted. So it was a test of some specific ideas in an approach to astrology called vibrational astrology. But we can use this same data to test other ideas. So what about good old conjunctions, oppositions, squares, trines, and sextiles? Many astrologers feel that, wow, why are you going off and researching these exotic things that we think are more subtle? What about the things that are more fundamental? Okay, so let's do it. Let's see if these aspects, often called the major aspects, the Ptolemaic aspects, if they are associated with extroversion and introversion in this particular situation. So any research project answers some specific question. Most research doesn't give us, some big global universal understanding of all of life. It just attempts to answer one particular, maybe a few particular questions. So the question here is, do these Ptolemaic aspects help us see if a person is more extroverted or introverted? So what I did is I added Sun Jupiter because we hypothesized that Sun Jupiter would incline people to be extroverted. Now you could pick other planetary pairs. Again, any research project picks and selects certain things to see how they work. So I picked Sun Jupiter to see if it would incline to extroversion. And what we found is that Sun trine Jupiter appears to mildly correlate with extroversion, and the other four aspects do not. So it's not black and white. Well, one part of it, let me take that back. One part of it is black and white, which is that the other four aspects, there's very strong evidence that they have nothing to do with extroversion. So if you have a birth chart and somebody has Sun sextile Jupiter or Sun conjunct Jupiter, you might think to themselves, oh, they're very outgoing, they're very expressive. This research suggests that's not true. Now, maybe you could do some more advanced, sophisticated research combining a lot of things, and you might get some indication of extroversion, but those aspects in themselves do not incline to extroversion. The evidence for this is very strong. The trine aspect might be different. So we know, I say no, we're confident is a better term. We're confident the other four do not. The trine looks like it might incline to extroversion. Now that's maybe not what we expected to find, but that's why we do research, right? So it's quite fascinating. So here's specifically what we did in the research. I did two things. First thing is I took what we call an astro signature, a combination of different astrological influences. I took the astro signature that was used in the vibrational astrology research and I added to it a Ptolemaic aspect to see if the Ptolemaic aspect would improve the results. Would adding Sun trine Jupiter to this vibrational astrology formula we call Astro signature, would it improve the results? Would it help us predict who is more extroverted? So here's the formula used in the vibrational astrology research. I present this in greater detail in another video on that research, and I don't need to go over the details, but there are three sections to it: the Sun Jupiter and Mars Jupiter uh, leading to extroversion. That's the one here. The two, the Sun Saturn and 7 vibration leading to introversion. That's two, and then Jupiter uh, way above the horizon is the third thing in that formula. So we add the fourth thing. I just added one line for Sun trine Jupiter and see if the results get better. So here's what we found. With the vibrational astrology astro signature, those three items, the correlation value is 0.13. This is the Pearson, if you're familiar with statistics, this is the Pearson correlation coefficient. It's the standard correlation value that most often used. It's 0.13, which is not a fantastically high correlation. It's a low correlation. But realistically, do we expect astrology to predict who is more extroverted versus introverted with a few things that we find? No. We're expecting to find a low correlation. And as I mentioned in that other video on the vibrational astrology research, there's very strong evidence, and it was confirmed in this research that I did, that the older you are, the more introverted you are. So if you're 50, 60, 70 years old, you're much more likely to be uh, introvert. Did I say that right? Well, I'll say it right now. The older you are, if you're 40, 50, 60, 70 years old, you're more likely to be introverted than if you're 20s, 30s. The older you are, the more introverted people become. That kind of makes sense. It feels like it's probably true, and it is true. There's been psychological research that confirms that. If you combine that with the astrology, if we find many other variables in the astrology, we didn't look at fire signs being extroverted. I mean, there's so many things. If we could find anything that works, that would be impressive. So the correlation is not that high, but the t value is extremely high, 4.1. The t value is a value in statistics that tells us what the probability is. When you get up to 4.1, the probability is less than 1 in 10,000. So even though the correlation is low, the probability of this happening is extremely unlikely, which suggests that the vibrational astrology formula works. Now, we add Sun trine Jupiter. And what happens? The t value goes up to around 4.2. It's getting better. Now, a jump from 4.1 to 4.2 might not look like a lot. It's impressive. When you have a t value of 4.1, to push that any higher, like it's you have to find something that really is inclined to extroversion. So it improved it. And the correlation went up only 1% from 0.13 to 0.14. Again, that might not look impressive, but you're talking about only one little aspect, Sun trine Jupiter. And for it to help at all, most things won't. I mean, you could pick hundreds of things, they're not inclined to do this. So that's impressive. And I tried it with two orbs, a 3-degree orb and 5 degrees 20 minutes. Where does a strange orb like 5 degrees 20 minutes come from? That's the orb we use in vibrational astrology. But I also tried a lower orb, and the results were similar. This suggests that Sun trine Jupiter might incline to extroversion. It might. It's not a huge effect. It's not what we call statistically significant, which I'll show you on one of the next slides. But it appears that it might. The other four aspects, they just act random. The t-value goes down, which is what usually happens if you add like a random variable, a variable that has nothing to do with what you're studying, something that has nothing to do with introversion, extroversion. That high t-value of 4.1 and correlation of 0.13, the t-value will come down. And it comes down almost by the same amount by all these aspects, between 3.91 and 3.99. It's not helping. We expect it to hurt because it's not related, and it will bring it down to not be as significant. So, and I tried with different orbs. These are kind of arbitrary orbs that I picked. For the sextile, I tried 2 degrees 40 minutes, which is the orb we use in vibrational astrology, and then a smaller orb and so on. I used bigger orbs for the conjunction opposition square. Whoops, that light just flashed. That's weird. Um, and I just randomly tried a few things, and they didn't work. So any research, you pick what you want and you see what happens. So this is what I selected. Any research can be further developed. You can, if you have the serious software, you have the data, you can put the formulas in there, you can try it out, you can try different things. Maybe you'll find something that was missed in this research. That's why research is ongoing. So it's interesting. Why would the trine possibly lead to extraversion? We don't know if it does or not, but there's some evidence it does. Well, here I summarize some thoughts about the different aspects. Um, the effect of conjunctions depends on other aspects to the conjunct planets. That's a theory that I use. I never really know what a conjunction will do. I have to see it in context. Every astrologer is different. The sextile, I thought, might have inclined to extraversion a little bit because I think of Sun sextile Jupiter as social, tolerant, engages with other people. Um, it could be mildly extroverted, but maybe it's not conspicuous enough to show up in this research. I don't know. This is why we do research. But a little bit disappointing that the sextile didn't work. Here's my conclusion. Those 11 vibration aspects that in the other research lead to extroversion from the vibrational astrology theory, Jupiter in 11 vibration is a little wild. I mean, these people don't sit still. And I think what this test is picking up is not, the psychological test that's evaluating introversion, extroversion. The impression I'm getting is it's not picking up kind of normal social activity for being extroverted. That's just normal that you would engage and be open. So if somebody's just, pleasant and not, pushing people off and likes to engage with them, it's not enough to get a really high extroversion score. This is all I can guess because all that's getting picked up uh, from the test seems to be extreme qualities. At least that's how we can make sense of the results. That's the theory we start developing. We don't know, but for whatever reason, Sun sextile Jupiter does not show as extroverted in these particular psychological tests. Again, you have to realize any research just tells you a few things. All we know is that with this particular test, which measures something that they're calling introversion, extroversion, what exactly those words mean, Sun sextile Jupiter does not lead to extroversion as defined by these tests, nor does Sun opposition Jupiter, which I also thought might be mildly extroverted, but what I'm thinking of extroverted and what this test is thinking of extroverted are either not the same thing or I'm wrong. It's not leading to extroversion. Sun square Jupiter, not leading to extroversion. Sun trine Jupiter appears that it possibly could be. So it's interesting. And I've got some speculations on why this might be. The most important thing with this research is that extroversion and introversion as defined by this test and as detected by this psychological test is not indicated by any Ptolemaic aspect except perhaps the trine. Now, one more thing. I added, for example, Sun trine Jupiter to the vibrational astrology astro signature. Why didn't I just run it separately? Why don't I just make an astro signature with one line, Sun trine Jupiter? Well, actually, I did do that. It's good to do it both ways. If you have a formula that you think works, that looks promising to you, and I think the vibrational astrology formula is extremely impressive, you have something that works, why replace it? I mean, it doesn't make sense. You say you add the new variable to your current theory. It's common sense. Since I think the vibrational astrology formula looks very promising, it's very compelling, I add it. But it's also good to be more thorough, or if you're not so confident in your formula, to just make an astro signature of just that variable. And something interesting happens when you do this that can be very counterintuitive. It might not be what you expect. Sometimes the thing you're looking at, by thing I mean in this case Sun trine Jupiter, it might help when you add it to the vibrational astrology formula. But then when you run it by itself, it doesn't work. So you would think if Sun trine Jupiter leads to extraversion, when you study it by itself, just look at Sun trine Jupiter, it'll work. You'll see the correlation that it leads to extraversion. And when you combine it with other things, excuse me, it will also work. There's something called Simpson's paradox, where a variable, the Sun trine Jupiter, is working by itself, but when you combine it with other things, it doesn't work. Weird. Or vice versa. It doesn't work by itself, but when you combine it with other variables, it does work. Well, it's not so weird if you study this and why it happens. I'm not going to go get into all that. You can Google Simpson's paradox and learn about it. But the bottom line is this. For those of you who are interested in figuring out how astrology works, it's good to know about little things like Simpson's paradox and to know that therefore it makes sense to try it both ways. Both ways meaning add it to an existing formula if you have one and then run it separately. And when I ran it separately, here's what I found. I found the same exact things. So I made an astro signature with just the one aspect. Sun opposition Jupiter has a negative correlation, minus zero point zero 0.01. If a variable has nothing to do with what you're looking at, if Sun opposition Jupiter is completely unrelated to extraversion, the R value will be close to zero. It might be minus zero point zero 0.01 or plus zero point zero 0.01. It'll be close to zero. That means no relationship. And the T value will be close to zero, and that's exactly what we get. Very, very close to zero. For the trine aspect, for example, with the 5-degree 20-minute orb, the correlation value is 0.02. Not impressive, but realize it's just one little aspect. It's not the only thing astrologically that would lead to extraversion. I mean, if you're a Hellenistic astrologer, Vedic astrologer, you'll have ideas completely different. Who knows? But if there's a little bit of a correlation and you get a t value 0.73, it's nowhere near statistically significant. But statistical significance is not how we think in research so much these days. We think about effect sizes. There appears that there might be a small effect size. When you're down around 0.01 and t-values of 0.02, plus it's, in addition, it's negative, and we're looking for positive. It's just saying, hey man, you don't have anything. But the trine looks like it might contribute to the extraversion, Sun trine Jupiter. So in this case, I do it both ways. I do the research by adding the Ptolemaic aspect to my vibrational astrology astro signature, and I run it separately. No problem with Simpson's paradox. They both confirm that the Sun trine Jupiter might incline mildly to extraversion. Now, conclusions. Maybe you're not happy with this research. You want something rock solid. Well, we did find something rock solid. We found rock solid that the sextile, opposition, square have nothing to do with extraversion as defined by this psychological test. So that's telling you something. You know, maybe not what we were hoping for, but it's good to know when we're, you know, we need we need to think more about this. What's going on? Um, Okay, so that's one thing. And a lot of astrologers will just say, well, you can't take one variable by itself. Sure, that maybe that's what it's telling us. But in any case, it's good to know. It's good to confirm it. Whether it's surprising or not surprising, it's controlled research. It's good to know. So we did find that out. We found that trine might mildly incline to extroversion. Now, this leads to an interesting thing. If that trine is leading to extroversion, point number two, it implies we need to think about these Ptolemaic aspects as being really different from each other. Not that trines and sextiles are so much the same. We're getting one result for sextiles, one for trine. So that's an interesting thought, that maybe we shouldn't be lumping these aspects together as much. It's just giving us something to think about, a suggestion. Point number three, the Ptolemaic aspects by themselves, if that trine has any effect at all in making a person more extroverted, it's very subtle. The vibrational astrology effects were huge, huge. That Sun, Jupiter, and 11 vibration, T value, when you combine all three of those things, 4.1, less than 1 in 10,000, it's extremely impressive. So this is what research is about. You're seeing the effect size. You're seeing with the real data that you have not selected, no selection bias, what the data is telling us. And from that we can build greater confidence in our conclusions. So also, excuse me, very impressive with that vibrational astrology research is we found in other research, such as Giselle Terry's research on bipolar disorder, that the 11 vibration is very important. And in that research, we came up with this idea that the 11 vibration is making the people very manic, very expressive. We also found in our research on the Gauquelin data how the 11 vibration is moving and dynamic, inclines to music, which is a dynamic, moving art form, but not towards other quieter activities. So there's a lot of research that's getting confirmed, and that's why the vibrational astrology research results were exciting. Number one, the effect size was huge. T value of 4.1, less than 1 in 10,000 probability, and it was consistent with previous theory. Both of those are impressive. And the fourth conclusion is this study needs to be replicated. If we can collect these test scores, the EYSENC, EYSENCK, I think it's pronounced, the EYSENC personality inventory measurement of extroversion, introversion, if we can collect that data for another, say 500, 1,000 people, something similar to what we did here with 940 people, if we can give that test again, preferably to a similar demographic, maybe students in the United States, because it could work differently in a different situation, something fairly close. It's always a little bit different, but that's okay. If that data could be collected with recorded birth times, critically important. Not just, oh, I think I was born at 3 a.m., but a recorded birth time to be sure of it, that we've got really solid data. If we replicate it, then, we can really have tremendously more confidence in the results. You start replicating something 3 and 4 times, and then you accept it as something to rely on. That's how research works. So we're starting a new field of astrology, a data-driven field of astrology. So that's what we found. I think it's interesting. It's not earth-shaking, kind of information, but to show you, what some of the kinds of real research and the really nerdy people who want to work through these things little by little and step by step, how that works. I'm almost positive this is my last slide. Yes, it is. So that's it, my friends. Thank you very much for listening. God bless. Namaste.